a portent of his future.
When he was a young boy, he tells a story about watching the cars go over the Arrowhead Bridge.
And he thought to himself, if I could only make a nickel on each car that went by, I could be rich someday.
In 1940, Al Sr. developed trouble swallowing. A visit to the Mayo Clinic revealed cancer of the esophagus. It was inoperable. By this time, the Amatuzio's eldest son, Donald, was enrolled in medical school, an ambition his parents insisted he continue to pursue. This meant that when his father finally succumbed to the disease, Al Jr. became the oldest male living at home.
My dad really became the man of the house. He went and collected bottles for pennies, for extra money. He collected coal off the side of the railroad tracks to heat the home, and he took on a lot of responsibility at a young age. I think he may have lost a lot of his childhood, which a lot of kids did, I think, back during the Depression.
Under Margaret's able direction, the entire family rose to meet the challenge.
Marge was a matriarch of that family. Al's father died when Al was 16, and she just rallied. The whole family rallied, and they had some pretty hard times, and she was the one that kept everything together.
She started a beer tavern, as a matter of fact, down in West Duluth to support the family.
Downstairs of the tavern, there was a bowling alley and a small pool hall. There were 3 pool tables down there. And myself and some of the younger kids in the neighborhood, we set pins. You had to set them in by hand, none of this automated stuff, and sit on the edge of the pit when the ball came smashing down and watch your legs so they wouldn't get hit. And she would always say, "Dear, you be careful you don't get hit by a pin," and things like that. Okay, Margaret.
By parlaying her resources, Margaret eventually purchased the Gitchinadji Supper Club in nearby Superior, Wisconsin. Throughout each venture, Al worked side by side with his mother as she labored to keep the family afloat.
At the Gitchinadji Club, I'm sure that he was very active in running the club with his mother. He was very close to his mother.
He was close to his mother until she died. She was just very, very close to him, and he to her. And I think you find a lot of very successful men were brought up by their mothers. Their fathers died at an early age and whatever, and I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems like it is.
Do you know that General Douglas MacArthur, his mother came and lived with him near West Point? Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a very, very dominating mother that was just into him and his idol, and I think mothers can make a tremendous contribution.
Margaret, for example, I think passed on her traditions of hard work and honesty and a little bit of stubbornness, although I don't think anybody will say that Babe Amatuzio was stubborn. I say that with tongue in cheek.
Our dad was an extremely patriotic person. He always felt that we owed this country everything. We were fortunate to be here. We're fortunate for what we have.
Like so many sons of immigrant families, Al Amatuzio was eager to answer America's call during the Second World War. Al graduated from Duluth's Denfeld Senior High School in 1942, only 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. His school yearbook listed his future ambition as oil engineer, but any aspirations other than military service were on hold. Prompted by a long-time fascination with flying, Al enlisted in the Naval Air Corps as a trainee pilot. But after months of study, the Navy decided they had enough pilots, and Al was released from the program. It was a bitter disappointment to a young man determined to serve his country.
He was still eager to get back into service, and he and his friend Anthony Rico joined the Merchant Marine, which he thought would be more another way that he could serve his country.
those merchant marine ships were unarmed. And they were always watching out for torpedoes. In fact, more merchant marine ships were sunk than naval ships were.
In fact, 1 in 26 mariners serving aboard merchant ships during the war died in the line of duty, a greater percentage than all the other U.S. services. By ferrying troops and supplies, Al and his fellow mariners made a vital and courageous contribution to the war effort, even as the scope of their sacrifice was suppressed to discourage the enemy. When the war ended, Al attended to unfinished business. His brief stint as a naval aviator had ignited a passion and an ambition he was determined to fulfill. He resolved to earn his pilot's wings, this time with the Air Force.
Back then, of course, flying was fairly new. This was a new thing. There was a mystique about it. There was pilots had a certain level of recognition and respect.
I don't think he could have been satisfied with any sort of mundane, any sort of other job. He needed more. That was his mind,
And he's actually pretty modest about flying. But hearing it from other people, he had the right stuff.
There are fighter pilots and there are pilots who fly fighters. Al was a fighter pilot. You had to have that instinct, that tenaciousness, that excellence, and he was very meticulous. He's very aggressive, but he's a good pilot, and that's what you measure a guy most by, and that can he fly, and Al could fly. And could he shoot? Al could shoot.
He was a good pilot, took a great deal of pride in how he flew the airplane, just like he did in how he dressed and talked and did everything. He just took a lot of pride in it.
The life of an Air Force fighter pilot was tailor-made to mesh with his natural drive and confidence. Like his father, Al was not a large man, but he was living proof that stature is less a factor of size than it is appearance and attitude.
I think one of the things that impressed me the most about Al, he was somewhat of a perfectionist.
He was real picky about everything being just right. And the guys used to ride him a little bit. He's ultra clean. His uniform was just sparkled all the time.
He always seemed bigger than life because he carried himself well. His shoulders were back, his chest was out, he had a nice trim waist, and his uniform always looked good. I mean, he walked in the room and his stature of size made no difference. He was as big as you wanted him to be.
By 1949, the Air Force was transitioning from prop fighters to jet aircraft. Stationed at Selfridge Air Force Base near Detroit, Michigan, Al helped usher in the new technology by flying the F-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. He also piloted what was likely the first jet to touch down in his hometown of Duluth, where he made a memorable impression on the members of the local Air National Guard.
And he reflied the airplane, checked everything around. Then he went back to the tailpipe and rumpled up some newspapers, stuck them in the tailpipe. Took a lighter out, fired him up. Nice little burning going on back there. He crawls in the cockpit, has the power unit start up, cranks up the engine starts, blows the newspapers out. He says, "That's the way we start them." Well, that was just the showman in Al.
He excelled as an aviator. He truly excelled, far beyond what most of his, if not all of his other counterparts could do. There were very, very few people that were comparable to him when he was in the cockpit of a plane.
When he was flying, I think he had the most joy in life.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah.
Despite Al's love of flying and his great success as an Air Force pilot, his family came first. When his mother fell ill, Al returned home to help run the family business. He immediately joined Duluth's Air National Guard 179th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, where he flew the famous P-51 Mustang.
He talks about that plane with great admiration. Its speed, its agility, and it required skill to fly. It had a large prop and a big motor, and if you accelerated too fast, it would twist the plane.
I was the guy that checked him out in a P-51. That's something he'll always remember, and he did an excellent job. And I remember telling him when he landed that you've got to have flown this airplane before, because you flew it so well that all I can think of is that you flew it before. No, I never did, he said.
Al's jet experience proved invaluable when the 179th replaced their Mustangs with F-94 Starfires. Al repeatedly proved his mastery with the sophisticated aircraft, even when confronted with a jet pilot's worst nightmare. On a mission over a remote part of Minnesota, Al's engine flamed out. His wingman was suddenly flying alongside a plane with no power, no instruments, and no radio.
And so he's gliding, and I'm having a hard time staying with him. And so finally I got up alongside of him, and I'm trying to talk to him. I don't know if he's hearing me. And I got on the radio, and I got a hold of Sage people, and they checked. And the closest field was Bemidji. And the weather, he said, was 5,000-foot high overcast. And I said, well, we can, we'll go over there and start circling down. And that's what we did. And the young airman got on the radio and said, I made a mistake. It's 500 feet. And so I tried to get a hold of Al. I signaled, and I said, if you can hear me, you better jump. Get out of that thing. It's 500 feet. Nothing, and we kept going. All of a sudden, it got really thick, and Al disappeared, and I'm screaming at him to jump out. And my heart was down in my belly, and I really felt bad, and I started back and was taking directions from the radar guy, and he says, "Could you see a target below your right?" And I said, "No, I'm in the weather." And we pick up once in a while. No. Well, I got back to the field, and just as I was coming up, I hear Albert on the radio, and he'd just gotten his radio back. Well, he'd got it relit again, way low, and he didn't have many instruments. They hadn't come back up again, and he went on needle ball and airspeed and broke out at 500 feet. Found the Highway 2 and was following it back to Duluth. And he came in, and I was never so happy to hear a voice in my life.
Along with Al's cool head and superb flying skills, he was a natural leader who inspired the best in his fellow pilots. Eventually, Lieutenant Colonel Amatuzio, known as Ammo to his men, was promoted to squadron commander.
He would bring lieutenants in. He'd listen to us, captains. He always had a open ear, open mind. So he got a lot of input, and he trusted you.
He's a pretty smart guy, and he'd pay attention to a lot of detail, really good at looking at that and seeing it. And he could tell when somebody really knew their stuff, and he would try to get that person into the position where he could do the most good. Ammo was a master at that.
He gave people confidence in themselves. He gave people, rather than just running everything to the top of it, he was a guy that would give you a rope, and then if the rope can come tight.
You can lead some people most of the time. Some people you got to kick in the rump once in a while. And if that was necessary, why, Al could do that. But overall, it wasn't necessary for Al because he could work with people. He worked very well with people. He understood people. He had an innate ability.
In 1955, Al married Carol Carl, an active, spirited woman whose personality mirrored many of Al's own traits. Eventually, their marriage would produce 4 children: Lori, Lynn, Daniel, and Alan. By this time, Al was flying full-time with the Air Guard, and growing up as part of a military family